Is this the one-of-a-kind throttle for you? I will help you decide in this review of my right-handed, self-purchased STECS with Space Throttle Grip. Hello, this is Ender, and welcome to my VRcade, where the focus is on immersion in virtual reality, but for today, that focus includes something Black gamers may find interesting as well. For space simulator games, piloting is pretty unique. Sure, you can play with a mouse and keyboard on a flat screen, and some of the best-known Elite Dangerous players like Meccan and Yamix say it's easier that way, but what is the fun in that? And if you aren't new to my channel, you know I much prefer immersion that is more enjoyable, such as walking on my VR treadmill, versus racking up a higher kill count with the motion controller and its thumbstick. I bought and paid for this STECS with Space Throttle Grip because it has two unique features, as far as I know, among all the throttles on the market. First, the grip tilts, and second, VKB Sim offers it in both a left and right-handed version. So back to Sim. Basically, the two most popular space sims are Star Citizen, which I've only played the tutorial for because it doesn't support virtual reality, and Elite Dangerous, which does. So you can guess which one's my favorite. In these simulators, you have 3 degrees of control: pitch, roll, and yaw on one hand, and on the other hand, propulsion via lateral, horizontal, and vertical, aka thrusters from 6 degrees, or giving you 6 degrees of control, which is really a lot like a VR headset and the way it and its controllers are tracked. But with degrees of control, you have physical feedback as opposed to swinging your arms through the air and not feeling anything, which for me is kind of immersion breaking. Generally, most space simmers consider a hands-on stick and stick, or HOSAS, setup to be the one that gives you the most control. Feel free to watch one of my videos that I'll link to down below, where I show what I've been using for the longest time, a HOSAS setup. However, some are fine using a hands-on throttle and stick, or HOTAS, where the throttle's small analog or oftentimes mini stick provides the vertical and lateral thrust you need for space game. The downside, for me at least, is the lack of precision in that mini stick. The more clear benefit of a HOTAS is you have a ton more precision on your main axis, aka your main throttle, potentially with detents that let you feel what speed you're at. Higher end throttles tend to have a large button box, or several button boxes, for functions to be bound from landing gear to menus to weapons. These buttons tend to outnumber those on a HOSAS, but not always, and more on that in a bit. However, in VR, feeling those buttons on those boxes can be hard to identify by touch. Plus, with me being a lefty and wanting to aim with my dominant hand, a HOTAS wasn't an option I was happy with. When you look at throttles in this mid to high end range, I think there are 3 main components to judge: the throttle base, the grip, and inputs like buttons, switches, and encoders. Let's start with the STECS base. The STECS base, which stands for Single Twin Engine Control System, is a mouthful, but fits. It's a modular base for a larger system, meaning you can customize its base and grip, and the throttle bases are even left and right hand specific. Want to fly a twin-engine F-15 and put more throttle to the left versus right engine for a quicker turn? That is where the MTG grip for the STECS allows you to do that, but sadly only for the left hand, and I say that because I'm left-handed. I like to control my roll, pitch, and yaw with my left hand and have throttle or propulsion on my right. So this diehard lefty won't be getting into that grip in this review, and only the Space Throttle Grip, aka STG grip for short, that is part of the STECS system. With this being made for space sims in mind, the Space Throttle Grip, or single engine setup, it might be more accurate to call the whole system the STECS. VKB, thank you so much for finally making a right-hand throttle grip. Now please offer us an MTG right-hand grip so I can get into DCS World. But back to the throttle base. The main axis is smooth and precise with its easily adjustable clutches just by turning your fingers without any special tools while you're playing the game. One issue other reviewers have remarked on is if you reduce the clutch resistance too much, then due to the nature of the throttle being an arc pathway, it will actually fall forward with no or little resistance. It's not something I mind because I usually do have a decent amount of clutch resistance set, but it could bother some others if you want to run light or no clutch. It also has incredibly precise Mars or magnetic sensors that VKB is known for in its other products. Its most distinctive and perhaps greatest feature is its swappable detents and frames. While only one detent frame is included with all the STG STECS configurations, I'll get back to those options when we get to button boxes, you do get a number of adjustable detents for it. You can set up to 3 anywhere along the frame, or 4, like me, if you ask around on the VKB Discord about where to insert the magic line of code pimp my STECS into the zconfig.ini. Wow, the innuendo is pretty great with this sexy device. Yari, you don't have one already, do you? Anyways, inside jokes. You'll learn more about them if you join the Discord. As for the STG or Space Throttle grip itself, it's very unique for the very specific purpose it is named after. It has other features no other throttle does. So the grip articulates both up and down for vertical movement and side to side for horizontal thrust or vectoring, giving you 6 degrees of control you need for space sims. It has, as far as I can tell, nearly the identical spring and clutch setup, aka gimbal, as the NXT Evo Gladiator base, which is quite popular. The clutches are easily accessible by removing the access door, so that's going to be this guy right here with a Phillips screwdriver. Then once you get that open, you're going to use a hex driver to tighten or loosen the clutches, and that's really not to create resistance when you're pushing out, it's to reduce the rebound. The springs are adjustable, although I counted removing 28 screws to get access to them. But hey, at least you can actually do that, unlike other flight gear in the market where everything is glued and not intended to be modified by the owner, much less repaired. Now with the stock number 20 springs, same as the Gladiator comes stock, it takes maybe a bit more pressure to articulate it than I cared for. VKB also includes a set of number 30 or stronger springs for more resistance, and for those worried about quote-unquote axis bleed or unintended movement in those axes when moving the throttle forward. So you can see here, I don't have this mounted, of course, that I'm moving it forward, and the axis or gimbal does have a tendency to move as you're doing that. I've ran number 10s on my Gladiator Omni throttle and want to engage those axes as easily as I can and don't think axis bleed is really an issue or concern in space sims. Now, those number 10s that I put into my STECS STG were not included. I pulled them out of my package of spares that came with my Gladiator, and they're fantastic. With the 20s, I found myself using the auxiliary axes less than my HOSAS, because on my HOSAS or Gladiator, I'm used to 10s. But with the lower resistance of the 10 springs pushing down, based on where my arm is, it's more easy to push down side to side, I found myself using those axes far more and to better effect than ever before in combat. I highly recommend adding a set of Gladiator springs to your cart if you choose to order an STG. By the way, I have heard that the 30s will reduce axis bleed, but not eliminate it. Someone might come up with a 3D print to lock the gimbal out for atmospheric flight sims, but at that point, you're better off buying an MTG for the split throttle, which has more buttons on it, assuming you're not a lefty and that's an option. Speaking of buttons, this is probably the weakest part of this grip. Presumably, because the springs and clutches take up so much space, there are fewer buttons, encoders, and hats than the MTG or even the Space Combat Grip or SCG that I love and I use for my left hand. There is not an analog mini stick, but that isn't so much a problem here, and if you really do need one, you could use the one on the SCG premium version. The big issue with the STG is you only have 2 5-way hats and 2 3-way hats versus the SCG premium's 4 5-way hats each. And the placement of these hats is more spaced out because, again, of the gimbal inside, the grip for the STG is larger. The 5-way for the index finger isn't something I would want to reach for in combat, but it does work well for menu navigation. The thumb 5-way has more noticeable wiggle or play before activation than on my SCG, but it's still gated or gives a firm click letting you know you activated a bind. I use this for my power management or systems, weapons, and engine power levels, respectively. Hat number 1, or the upper 3-way switch, has edges that many others I've talked to have described as sharp, and I admit I was thinking I was going to take my Dremel to it at first to smooth out the ridges, but now I actually like that sharpness on the inside of my inner thumb for switching tabs. As opposed to using my thumb pad, I can really feel when I've pressed on that 3-way. Buttons 1 and 2 are in great locations, but I wish they didn't feel exactly the same because I easily mix them up and activate a heatsink when I meant to boost. H2, or the second 3-way hat, is the hardest to reach, and while I don't have to move my palm to reach it, I do have to stretch my thumb. So I use it for super cruise and hyperspace jumps. Now let's talk about the wheels that were clearly designed for Star Citizen. The wheel by your pinky is actually an Axis and probably great for laser mining in that game, which it is literally labeled as. For Elite, I barely use it for sensor. Then we have another Star Citizen labeled wheel, Speed Limit, which is an encoder wheel with a push feature. Again, another thing I wish was a button, and I still haven't found a use for it other than external camera speed, same as I did with my Gladiator's wheel, but that was on the base or in less valuable real estate, not on the grip. Then there is the biggest slap in the face to us Elite players, the Space Brake System. Unlike the Axis at the base of the Gladiator that you can use as a mini throttle, this one returns back to what I'm going to call 0 or start due to a spring. And for the longest time, neither anyone on the VKB Discord or myself could find a use for it. Come on, VKB, have you not noticed the rally against the Thargoid invasion, 4 new ships, and the hype around colonization? Okay, so colonization is still in a beta and a bit of a mess, but I bet it will be fixed before Star Citizen is out of beta. It is out of beta, right? Hold on, Star Citizen is in alpha after 12 years? Well, maybe if it ever gets VR, I'll check it out. Well, anyways, that was my frustration with this Axis as an Elite Dangerous player until I tried docking. I noticed that coming from the Omni throttle, where my stick always springed back to center, with the STG, it was harder to park my ship with the throttle's constant speed and for detents, because there's a lot more jump with how I have that set up in your throttle speeds. That is when I remembered how my wingmate, Weaver, was talking about trimming axes for more control. I reached out for help on that Discord, and Juccolo found me and gave me a way to turn a taunt into a tool. I'll leave the instructions in the description, but basically it allows me to decelerate and even reverse my speed with fine precision, much like my Gladiator, but still keeping those detents I so love for everything else. The big button boxes that are often attached to a throttle have always looked cool, but never seemed practical to me. In the first place, they weren't an option because there weren't any for the right hand until now. Yes, I know you can remove the springs on a Gladiator for a dead stick, but I tried it and even the half dead mod, but neither worked for me, at least in Elite, although I do like no spring in Star Wars Squadrons. But at that point, I could just use my STECS. I purchased the STECS STG standard configuration because I wanted the stem module or button box. The SCG, on the other hand, at least with my gunfighter base, with fewer buttons than the Gladiator one, plus the STG grip, does not provide enough buttons for Elite alone. Although I had buttons left over for something simpler like Star Wars Squadrons. The STEM module, I combined enough non-combat features there. I mainly didn't buy the Max because I never much cared for the ATEM module that's included with it, and I didn't think those buttons were very useful and probably feel very similar, which again is a detriment in VR. However, I was surprised that having the stem mounted in front and above the grip was the most comfortable and accessible for buttons. Having the stem mounted low while seated meant my chair armrests were in the way of reaching it behind or closer to my armrests, even with adjustable armrests on my chair. Since I have a Monster Tech mount, I was able to mount it above and tilt it downward towards the stick. So I can, for most of the time, press the buttons without taking my hand off the throttle grip, which again is huge in VR. So my thoughts on configurations are: Mini only makes sense for a mount, otherwise it won't stay in place. Mini Plus doesn't add enough with the ATEM module. Standard probably is best for a desk where you are reaching up or using a custom mount solution where you're going to remove the stem and mount it in front of your STECS. And Max probably makes the most sense if you're going with VKB mounts. You'll get more hardware that way and be able to mount the stem in front of your grip. I am glad I went with the standard though, because the money I saved went towards the stem back cover, which I needed to mount it, which is not included with the STECS standard. And also I could put that money towards some extra detents with frames instead. But either is close in price, it just comes down to which parts you need. Buttons feel great. My favorite is the knurled up and down toggle, although I did have the down activation on this toggle switch fail. However, VKB is already sending me a replacement part with no hassle whatsoever. The white K switches have good feedback for cargo scoop and lights, as do the encoders for FSS tuning. I use the 5 buttons down the right side of the stem for the external camera. The only thing that bugs me about the stem really is that the flap switch only has a 3-position detent frame, and I couldn't get it to work properly for landing gear. And maybe I could with software, but either way, I don't want to hit that detent in the middle. Fortunately, Salty on the Discord is printing me a 2-position detent frame that should solve that problem, as well as cool buttons. He has an Etsy shop I will link to if you're interested. I was worried about going to a HOTAS and not finding it precise and intuitive as the HOSAS I have been using for years. I have now adjusted, and I'm going to stick with the STECS STG because of its very unique gimbal that at first I was concerned about. I thought I would ideally want to run a HOSAS with the throttle off to the side, because I thought I would need a HOSAS for dogfighting and would want the throttle for exploration and trading and supercruise. A button for throttle percent works of course, but it's about as immersive as a keyboard. And I will probably be selling my Omni throttle or gifting it to a friend. STG isn't perfect, but having the detents versus less buttons on the grip is a trade-off that I will happily take. What are your thoughts? I would love to hear them from other STG owners and lefties in particular. This was a long script, about the longest I've ever written, so if you appreciated this thorough review, please consider clicking that like button and subscribing if you would like to see more from me. Thank you so much for watching.